There is a moment in a man's life that no one warns him about. It doesn't come with drama. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as normal. Conversations get shorter. Messages stop coming. Invitations fade. The encouragement he once took for granted evaporates without explanation. And at first, he assumes it's temporary. He tells himself people are busy. He tells himself it will pass. But then weeks turn into months, and slowly an uncomfortable realization forms. No one is backing him anymore. Not emotionally, not strategically, not publicly. No one is standing behind his name. No one is protecting his reputation. No one is invested in his success. And this is where most men begin to lose themselves. They panic internally while pretending they're fine. They start explaining themselves too much. They soften their ambition so it doesn't threaten the few connections they have left. They dilute their goals so they remain acceptable. They become agreeable, apologetic, smaller. Not because they lack strength, but because they fear isolation more than they respect themselves. But power has never been built by men who needed consensus. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it polite terminology. He observed something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. People do not support strength while it is forming. They support it after it is already won. Before that point, strength is treated as arrogance, threat, or delusion. And the man who waits for backing before acting will remain permanently stalled between intention and execution. Powerful men do not win because they are supported. They are supported because they win. This distinction changes everything. When no one backs you, you are not being punished. You are being removed from illusion. You are being stripped of emotional scaffolding so that you can discover whether your direction is real or borrowed. Because borrowed ambition collapses the moment applause disappears, but self-generated ambition sharpens in silence. Machiavelli never advised men to chase approval. He advised them to understand leverage. Approval is not leverage, it is volatility. It rises and falls based on perception, mood, and advantage. The man who depends on it builds his confidence on sand. So the first psychological shift a powerful man makes when no one backs him is brutal but clarifying. He stops interpreting lack of support as feedback. Silence is not a verdict. Absence is not evidence of failure. The world is not a referee handing out judgments in real time. Most men assume it is. They assume if something were meant to succeed, it would be encouraged. They assume resistance means error. That assumption alone has killed more potential than incompetence ever has. Powerful men understand something colder and far more accurate. Resistance is not correlated to truth, it is correlated to disruption. The moment you move in a direction that changes your status, your access, or your trajectory, the social environment around you destabilizes. People cannot immediately categorize you. You no longer fit neatly into the role they assigned you, and uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. So they withdraw support, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. This is why Machiavelli warned against needing to be loved. Love is conditional on predictability. Respect is conditional on outcomes. Power requires neither in the early stages. When no one backs you, the first advantage you gain is informational clarity. You begin to see who was present for convenience rather than conviction. You learn who needed you stable rather than successful. You discover who was invested in access, not in growth. Most men never learn this because they never lose the crowd long enough to observe it. Isolation, when correctly interpreted, is a diagnostic tool. And once the emotional fog lifts, a powerful man makes his next critical move. He becomes internally sovereign. Internal sovereignty is the ability to act without psychological permission. It is the absence of the reflex to explain yourself. It is the end of rehearsing your plans in conversations that were never designed to support them. It is the moment you stop outsourcing confidence to reaction. Machiavelli understood that men are governed less by laws than by perceptions, but he also understood that a man who governs himself becomes immune to manipulation. When no one backs you, there is no one to please, no alliance to maintain, no image to protect. This is not loss, this is freedom. Freedom is dangerous because it removes excuses. A man without support cannot blame misalignment. He cannot claim sabotage. He cannot hide behind misunderstanding. Every result now traces directly back to him. His discipline, his decisions, his consistency, his restraint. This level of accountability terrifies average men. Powerful men welcome it because it concentrates control. When responsibility is diffused, power is diluted. When responsibility is singular, power accumulates. This is why Machiavelli favored rulers who relied on their own arms rather than mercenaries. Dependency always introduces fragility. Emotional dependency is no different. The man who needs reassurance will eventually compromise strategy to preserve comfort. The man who can tolerate solitude will preserve strategy even when comfort disappears. And this leads to one of the most misunderstood truths about power. Speed belongs to the unsupported. Men who are backed must negotiate. Men who are endorsed must maintain consensus. Men who are emotionally invested in support must consider optics. Men without backing move without friction. They do not wait for alignment. They do not explain before acting. They do not soften decisions to maintain approval. They test, they execute, they adjust. While others are still discussing, the unsupported man is already collecting data. Machiavelli never romanticized unity. He romanticized effectiveness, and effectiveness requires decisiveness unburdened by emotional debt. When no one backs you, no one can slow you down with doubt disguised as concern. This is why Machiavelli emphasized timing. To act too early is weakness. To speak too early is exposure. The unsupported man learns patience not as passivity, but as strategic concealment. And something interesting happens during this phase. The pain changes. At first, the absence of backing hurts. It feels personal. It triggers memories of abandonment, rejection, inadequacy. But over time, the pain hardens into resolve. The man stops asking why no one believes in him and starts asking whether he believes in his own standard strongly enough to enforce it without witnesses. This is where most men fail permanently. They misinterpret emotional discomfort as danger. They retreat to familiarity. They re-enter social loops that feel safe but lead nowhere. They trade growth for reassurance, and the moment they do, power dissipates. Machiavelli would call this a failure of nerve. Power requires the ability to withstand internal discomfort without external compensation. This is not cruelty, this is maturity. The man who cannot endure being misunderstood will never do anything that truly changes his position. And here is the paradox. Once a man stops needing support, support returns, but transformed. It returns not as encouragement, but as interest, not as belief, but as leverage. People do not rally around effort, they rally around trajectory. The same individuals who withheld backing when the path was uncertain will reappear once outcomes clarify, not because they changed, but because perception did. Machiavelli understood this ruthlessly. Men follow strength once it is visible. They abandon it while it is forming. The powerful man does not resent this, he expects it. He understands that loyalty is rare, alignment is conditional, and respect is earned only through demonstrated authority. He does not moralize this reality, he uses it. By the time backing returns, he no longer needs it, which is precisely why it becomes safe to accept.
And this is the final psychological advantage of winning alone: immunity. A man who has learned to operate without backing cannot be controlled by its withdrawal. Praise does not intoxicate him. Criticism does not destabilize him. Isolation does not frighten him. He has already passed through the furnace where identity is forged without witnesses. That is power. Not domination, not aggression, not noise, but self-command under pressure. Machiavelli did not teach men to be ruthless for its own sake. He taught them to be realistic about human nature and disciplined about their own. The man who wins when no one backs him has internalized both lessons. He does not beg history for permission. He shapes conditions quietly until permission becomes irrelevant. So if you find yourself unsupported right now, understand this clearly. You are not behind.
You are being refined. You are being forced into the psychological posture required for authority. Do not rush to be understood. Do not dilute your direction. Do not trade silence for comfort. Build, sharpen, execute. Let outcomes speak. Because when power finally recognizes you, it will not ask whether anyone backed you on the way up. It will only ask whether you can hold it once you arrive. And the man who learned to win alone already knows the answer. What most men never realize is that support does not disappear randomly. It disappears when your trajectory threatens equilibrium. When you were predictable, agreeable, and safely contained within expectation, support felt natural. The moment your direction implied separation, financially, psychologically, or socially, support thinned out. Not because you were wrong, but because growth destabilizes relationships built on sameness. Power creates distance before it creates admiration. This is why powerful men do not measure themselves by social temperature. They measure themselves by internal alignment. They ask a different question than the crowd asks. Not, do they approve, but, am I positioned correctly? Approval is emotional. Positioning is strategic, and strategy survives moods. When no one backs you, something critical happens to your perception. You begin to see how often support is actually a form of restraint, how often encouragement is only given when it keeps you manageable, how frequently advice is really a soft attempt to keep you familiar. This is not evil, it is instinct. People prefer stability over excellence in others because excellence forces comparison. The unsupported man is freed from comparison. Without an audience, he stops measuring progress against peers. He stops scanning sideways for reassurance. His attention narrows, his standards sharpen, his tolerance for distraction collapses. He becomes less expressive and more deliberate. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is strategic consolidation. Machiavellian psychology is not about manipulation first. It is about self-containment. Before a man can influence the world, he must stop being influenced by every fluctuation in it. A man whose mood depends on recognition is already governed. A man whose resolve remains intact in silence cannot be easily moved. This is where discipline changes character. Early discipline is forced. It requires motivation. It needs reminders. But discipline forged in isolation becomes structural. It no longer asks how you feel. It simply executes. The unsupported man does not wake up asking whether today will be productive. Productivity becomes non-negotiable, not because someone expects it, but because his identity now demands it. This is the stage where men become misunderstood. They speak less, they explain less, they are less emotionally available to chaos. Others interpret this as coldness, arrogance, or detachment. In reality, it is concentration. Power does not announce itself while it is still under construction. It withdraws, it fortifies, it reduces unnecessary exposure. The need to be understood is one of the most expensive habits a man can carry.
It keeps him talking when he should be observing, defending when he should be advancing, explaining when he should be executing. The man who wins without backing understands that misunderstanding is temporary, but wasted momentum is permanent. So he allows people to be wrong about him. He does not correct narratives. He does not chase clarity. He does not argue with projections. He understands that most judgments are not evaluations of him, but reflections of the observer's limits. To fight those judgments would be to let them matter. And this leads to a subtle but critical advantage: emotional insulation. When no one backs you, insults lose their edge, praise loses its intoxicating effect. You stop oscillating between pride and insecurity. You develop what powerful men have always possessed: emotional range without emotional volatility. You can feel without being controlled by feeling. You can experience doubt without obeying it. This is psychological armor. From this position, strategy becomes easier, decisions become cleaner, risk assessment becomes more accurate, because fear is no longer amplified by social consequence. Failure is no longer catastrophic because it is private. Success is no longer fragile because it is internally anchored. The unsupported man begins to operate from consequence, not comfort. This is why he becomes dangerous, not in temperament, but in capability. He is willing to endure what others avoid. He is willing to build where others retreat. He is willing to delay gratification longer than others can tolerate. Time becomes his ally because he is no longer in a hurry to be validated. Powerful men think in years, while others think in moods. Another shift occurs quietly during this period. The man stops over-identifying with outcomes. Because no one is watching, he is free to experiment, to fail without shame, to pivot without embarrassment, to refine without narrative pressure. He no longer needs every action to look impressive. He needs it to be effective. This is why men who build alone often leap forward suddenly. Outsiders call it luck. In reality, it is compounded preparation finally visible. Momentum does not grow linearly. It grows invisibly, then violently. Those who were absent during the invisible phase are shocked by the acceleration. But the man who lived through it is not surprised. He knows exactly how long it took. He remembers the silence, the doubt, the repetition, the days where nothing seemed to move. And because of that memory, success does not make him reckless, it makes him precise. This is where Machiavellian realism becomes essential. Power gained without struggle often produces arrogance. Power forged in isolation produces restraint. The man who learned to win without backing does not squander advantage. He understands how fragile position can be when discipline relaxes. He does not mistake attention for stability. When backing eventually returns, and it often does, it arrives differently. It is less emotional and more transactional. Opportunities replace encouragement. Alignment replaces belief. The powerful man accepts this without resentment. He never expected loyalty from those who did not share risk. This is an important distinction. He does not punish absence. He simply remembers it. Memory, not bitterness, is what preserves power. The man who wins alone learns to track patterns. Who appears during effort versus outcome? Who supports during uncertainty versus clarity? Who stays consistent versus opportunistic? These observations shape future alliances. He becomes selective, not cynical. And because he no longer fears being alone, he does not overvalue company. This is one of the most threatening traits to the social order. A man who does not need approval cannot be steered with praise. A man who does not fear isolation cannot be controlled by exclusion. This is why such men are often labeled difficult, intense, or uncompromising. Those labels are defensive reactions to independence. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. He would note that power is not threatened by opposition as much as it is threatened by dependency. The man who relies on others to sustain his identity will eventually surrender decision-making to preserve belonging. The man who has already survived without backing cannot be extorted by withdrawal. This is the final psychological transformation. The man becomes internally complete, not emotionally numb, not socially withdrawn, but self-contained. His sense of worth is no longer outsourced. His direction no longer requires reinforcement. His discipline no longer needs supervision. From this state, power is not chased, it is attracted, because authority recognizes authority. When you no longer rush to be chosen, you become selectable. When you no longer ask to be included, you become respected. When you no longer perform for validation, your presence carries weight. This is the paradox most men never solve. The less you need support, the more valuable your alignment becomes. And if support never returns, the man is still intact. That's the real win. Winning when no one backs you is not about proving others wrong. It is about proving yourself stable under conditions where most people collapse. It is about becoming so internally aligned that external fluctuation no longer dictates behavior. This is the psychology Machiavelli understood. Not dominance for its own sake, but self-command so complete that domination becomes unnecessary. So if you are standing in that quiet season right now, where messages are fewer, encouragement is absent, and recognition feels
Do not rush to escape it. Do not scramble to recreate comfort. Do not mistake silence for failure. This is the phase where your nervous system recalibrates, where your discipline hardens, where your dependency dissolves, where your authority begins. Most men will never pass through this phase intact. They will trade it for distraction, validation, or retreat. But the few who endure it emerge changed. They do not need to announce who they are. They do not need to argue for their worth. They do not need to be backed to move forward. They have already learned the rarest skill of all, how to win alone.